I think this is the first session after lunch, so I'm going to try it to make it as interesting as possible. But please bear with me if I'm not that successful in that. I do hope I would be, because we do have some very interesting insights to share with you. The plan for the day is to actually cover three things. I want to talk about what's really happening in India. And I think all of us represent what we think is a dimension of India, but it's obviously much broader than that. So I want to spend some time in actually just reflecting back how is the country and the discourse itself changing. From there, we'll then get into what we find very exciting, and that's our profession, which is to understand the online consumer. And within the online consumer's mind, how is fashion getting repositioned, given the changes that are happening in the broader India. And then finally, I want to share with you some very exciting insights from our work at Myntra and Jabong on really what are people buying online, right? And therefore, if we were to take that forward and understand the forward-looking trends, what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, and what do we expect the top 10 trends to look like? So without much ado, let me just get into it. How's the country evolving? Let's make that the starting point, right? I think, like I mentioned, India, if we put it in the context of the globe, right? Always Indians are being described as people who value family, where we and a collective sense is far more important than the individualistic sense which has been ascribed largely to the Western world, right? So that's the East versus West divide. But what's interesting is that even within India, is now we are seeing a resurgence of what we are starting to call a Bharat versus India. And as a marketer, this is something you are very fascinated by, because this emerging India, and I think a lot of us here will actually recognize more with this India than the Bharat, is starting to become more about me greater than we, right? And therefore, what is my sense of individualism and expression, and how is that going to manifest in the decisions I make going forward? So that's one big, broad cultural discourse that we strongly believe is actually painting all of India and is creating very interesting dynamics for us to learn from. So just to reflect a little bit more on what it really means, if you look at Bharat, I already talked about the universalism and the inclusiveness. What that means from a fashion perspective is that you're looking for acceptable fashion, right? If I wear this and if I step out, will I be accepted? That is as important as the fact that will I make a fashion statement, which is really what the India and the urban India is looking for, right? So you have two very diverse need states that are emerging from this mindset itself. I already talked about the joint family versus nuclear. From a shopping behavior perspective, what is considered progressive shopping in the mindset of Bharat? And remember, I'm not talking about any geos. I'm talking about a mindset rather than geographies itself, because we find people with these mindsets can be actually sitting in metros, right? For them, progressive shopping means being able to shop in a mall, right? While for the India, progressive shopping definition now is becoming shop online, right? And that's what they're considering is the cool thing to do. Popular brands as acceptable fashion versus, I will spend on expensive brands because I like to flaunt, and, it is my sense of individualism that I want to express. Anand, in an earlier session, I don't know how many of you were there, actually talked about the emergence of a new age consumer, right? And, we are calling these the Gen Z consumers. This is, again, a very different facet of India that we must understand. Why? Because it's already close to 600 million. And at that size, it's actually 2x the size of US population already, right? And it is more than the population of all of Europe put together as well, by those standards. So what does this mean? And why should I now understand this Gen Z consumer? Till a couple of years back, I used to feel very proud and happy that, we are so-called part of the millennial club. And everybody, in every marketing conference, every brand summit, you used to talk about what are the millennials up to. So sorry to sort of burst that bubble. I think our era is passé, right? We were the age of the millennials. Come, let's welcome the Gen Z, because this is the consumer that we all now need to understand. So what's different? The millennials grew up, and as they were growing up, they witnessed the rise of the internet. right? And we saw it as a huge power. We've embraced it. However, for the Gen Z, they actually were born in the age of the internet. For them, this is not some new age thing that has emerged. This is what life is for them. And that has huge manifestations on how they approach and they use technology. Simple things, right? So 2 screens is what an average millennial uses. 5 screens is what an average Gen Z is expected to be using by the time as they keep growing up, right? For a lot of millennials, the dominant choice of profession still continues to be a safe salaried job. Come Gen Z, and you see the resurgence and the need to be entrepreneurs, a desire to be an entrepreneur even if they are choosing a conventional job, right? So again, from a mindset perspective, very different. Safety net is not what is desirable. Experimentation is what is desirable. And by the way, like, how many people in this room are on Facebook and use Facebook? Fantastic, great, right? No Gen Z will be caught dead using Facebook today. And I think that's what is, again, creating a departure, and very important for us to understand, because this is a consumer that's not who we are. And therefore, we need to understand them even more deeply if that's the consumer we want to address from a fashion needs perspective. Okay, so moving on, right? So I talked about 2-3 facets of India: Bharat, India, mindsets, emergence of a new generation. But what does this all mean, right? I think the good news is that technology is acting as a great unifier. And what we're seeing is that while all of these differences exist, India overall is embracing technology like never before, right? Already close to 500 million people have started to access the internet in a meaningful way. Out of this, close to 300 million are accessing actively at least once every month. Even within this, not a huge drop-off, but a good 200 million are online transactors, which basically means that they're making some transaction, either a ticket booking or a product like a mobile phone, or even other services online, right? So they're actually making transactions, which is half the universe of consumers who's actually even on the internet. And finally, among this group, the fashion shoppers are actually 60-odd million who are doing repeat purchases. Another favorite of my insights is that, how many of us will agree that India has turned mobile? I'm sure everybody would, right? That's not a surprise. But what's very interesting is that the number of people with mobile phone access in India today is actually larger than the number of people who have access to a hygienic toilet. And it's larger than the number of people who have access to actually a full brick and mortar house, right? That's how dramatic the penetration of a mobile is. It's come far closer to what food consumption and the access to food is than you would find any other gadget or an appliance actually coming to, right? So what does this mean for us? A lot of changes, and these changes are therefore rightfully impacting the way fashion is getting consumed. So, we looked at the fashion consumers, and we said, should we try and understand their various segments, right? And it's a marketer's delight, so that's what we've done. And I'll not get into a lot of details, but I wanted to share with you that, we broadly looked at 2 dimensions, one being affluence of the segment itself, the other being their attitudes towards fashion, and we've used various criteria from, how forward-looking the fashion is, to the depth of various categories that you explore. And please keep in mind that this is all being done keeping an online context in mind. And therefore, these are by definition people who are at least accessing internet, right? So they are all part of that 300 million MAU consumers that I talked about. We looked at 9 segments overall. Right on the top, you see a segment called the Urban Trailblazer. Again, a lot of people in this room will recognize that segment, a lot of familiarity. Sec A1 plus on an average, working, affluent, located in urban areas, can be in a tier 1 or a tier 2. That's, that's not the key point. This is the me versus we consumer that I talked about earlier. Well-traveled, and from a fashion preference perspective, very clearly are the ones who are adopting luxury, who are adopting a lot of branded fashion and are willing to experiment. Mobile is their TV, very clearly. The other two phenomena which are very interesting about these people is zero guilt, right? And which is very important because a lot of branded fashion in India actually gets a fillip whenever people are willing to be able to flaunt their fashion sensibilities using a brand name, right? So that's clearly an opportunity with this segment. Another interesting one is the, knowing is the new showing phenomena with this segment. I think we all also in many parts are guilty of this. And I was just reflecting, we are all here today talking about various insights, how much I know about fashion, because that has become the new test for how good you are, right? And therefore, knowing is becoming as powerful as what you could actually do with your goods, right? So having a fancy car is no longer helping you show yourself off, but knowing the world and being very well informed about buzzwords like artificial intelligence does. So that's what these sessions help us with. In contrast is another segment, and this is also an urban segment, but it's an urban value seeker segment. Fairly large and very well represented online because this is a segment which obviously does react to a lot of the discounts and other promotions that are made available. Again, 40+ working men and women, more often in the tier 2 and 3 cities, but also they are in tier 1. Very risk averse, strong preference for TV viewership, and again has implications for the marketers in the room. Another significant aspect of this consumer is very open to suggestions, right? And what that means is that they're very susceptible to what is now being called the fake news syndrome, right? Anything that they receive on messages like WhatsApp, they do tend to believe in and pass out. And therefore, we call these consumers as the consumers who would get informed through any source without trying to look at the validity, right? And that has implications on how people have been trying to influence this segment as well. Finally, and I think this is probably the most exciting part of my presentation today, a few insights on what does this all mean in terms of the trends that are emerging. So let me start with the first one, sustainable fashion and pride and heritage. So if I go back to the trendsetter segment, right, for these people, it is going to become a huge deal. They're already buying a lot of sustainable fashion, and therefore India is well set to become the largest market for sustainable fashion by 2030. It's also ironic and sad at the same time that we are also, unfortunately, creating the largest cause for the need of sustainable fashion because we are among the largest contributor to waste, right? But having said that, there's a large group among us who's now willing and adopting sustainable fashion and therefore making it a destination for that. Already, between Myntra and Jabong platforms, we are seeing a 3x rise in this segment. In sharp contrast comes fast fashion. We talked about it already a lot during the day. And we find that fast fashion is here and very much here to stay, already growing 3x. Even within fast fashion, and later some of my colleagues from Myntra will be talking about this, but we are seeing acceptance, at least within the consumers, of designerless fashion, right? Which basically means that we now have artificial intelligence and machine learning powering designs, and that getting accepted very easily and happily by consumers. And actually, they're being able to do that job even better than before. So more on that later during the day. Third one, activewear. This probably comes not as much surprise, for a lot of people here because activewear is becoming a popular and dominant category. What's insightful, I think, really is the fact that 60% of this growth is actually getting contributed by tier 2 markets, right? And which is not the normal market that we think of when we are thinking of adoption here. The second big trend within activewear is that women consumers are going to actually, be the larger contributor to the growth, while men were the previous large contributors to this growth. Premium goes online. I think, again, I'm reflecting on one of the panel discussions in the morning, right? We talked about this debate of how is the Indian consumer really buying just more by volume or by value, right? I think the good news is that at least online, the acceptance of luxury has finally arrived, right? We have seen now 4x growth in what we call premium price points. Even within that, what's interesting is that the acceptance of buying higher price points is increasing, right? So if on an average, I used to consider shopping premium on online as, let's say, 100, today I'm willing to spend 160 of that in my online luxury purchases. So we are definitely seeing online becoming a destination and an accepted destination for luxury shopping now. Another emerging category is beauty and personal care. Again, I don't think it throws a big surprise, but it has traditionally not been a big category for online, but now seeing tremendous, almost exponential growth. And we expect beauty and personal care over the next 3 to 4 years to be among a very large, almost 1/3 of the overall size of the market. Accessories, much like beauty and personal care, growing really, really fast. And interestingly, at least in the online shopping behavior, it benefits itself as being a basket filler, right? So it's helping me complete my entire look. And again, for the trendsetter segment, it means that it's giving me the individuality that I can offer, even while I'm having to conform with the regular apparel that I normally go out with, right? And that's fairly interesting because it gives us very interesting opportunity to cross-sell and upsell, and that's really one of the big focus areas. So finally, what does this all mean, right? I think in summary, what we are seeing is that pretty much every segment is growing, and that's the good news. And within that, if you see the growth of the online fashion market in particular, we see it becoming almost 3.5x in the next 2 to 3 years. And what that really means is that almost 50% of the organized branded shopping within the next 3 to 5 years will start to happen online, right? So that's in summary, I think the future is clearly very, very interesting. And I leave you with that thought on how we as brands and as marketers take these learnings and pick up from there and see what we want to do with it. Like me, if you have a question on your mind that why this particular image as the finale, so I can assure you that my team says that the boy was good eye candy, so I hope the women in the room agree with that. On that note, thank you very much.